All right, so I'm going to talk about again why switching away from 5e to an older system is better, but not the OSR. The OSR is what it is. It does some things really well, and it does some things not so well. So in my last episode, I guess I'm making a podcast here. This is cool. The last episode, I talked about why I'm switching back to 4e. Just to recap, I played all the editions, and I've decided I'm going back to 4E. Why? What problems are there? What are we trying to solve here? The main problem is modern contemporary D&D and RPGs in general, but really 5e in particular. But this was around in 4E as well. This is kind of since WotC has taken over D&D, this whole idea of Rule Zero and why that's been such a problem. So Rule Zero is this concept that, here's a quote from TV Tropes. The GM is permitted to supersede, change, interpret, or flat out ignore the rules when the rules would ruin enjoyment and fair play. Now, that's the promise. Does it actually deliver on that promise? I would argue no, it doesn't. It creates even more problems. The original purpose was to enhance the enjoyment and fair play by allowing this flexibility in the game rules, and the DM can do whatever they want because they're responding on the fly to changes in the game, and they're going to make it more fun somehow by breaking the rules of the game. I would argue breaking the rules of the game makes it less enjoyable for most people, unless you have absolute trust in your DM, which even then, if you have absolute trust, doesn't mean they're going to break the rules successfully. The rules are there for a reason. It's to have everyone playing have a shared agreement on how we adjudicate and how we measure and how we resolve things. And if you start breaking that, you can have these unintended consequences, these second and third order breaking effects that you don't even know about. Now, it also has led to this culture of being overly focused on storytelling at the expense of structured gameplay. And I would argue, and I'm not the first one to talk about this, like lots of people talk about this. In fact, it's probably the thing people are talking about the most right now. But this culture, and you can see it in, Critical Role and all the popular actual plays and whatever, this culture focused on storytelling and at the expense of gameplay. We're playing a game. We're not telling a story. Now, hopefully a story emerges from this gameplay, and that's the most exciting part of RPGs, is when you play this game and it's so engaging that you tell a story about what happened. We took our party down into the dungeon and we met these monsters. Like, that's the story you get from the gameplay. What doesn't tend to work is when the DM has an idea of, okay, now the party is going to enter the dungeon, and then they're going to do this, and then they're going to do that. Not even railroading, but just pre-scripted stories is just not very fun. It's just not very fun. Maybe your DM is a master storyteller. Maybe. But even then, I would argue that the engagement comes from the player agency, the DM fairly just calling balls and strikes, being a referee, not a storyteller. Because those choices are, and the story that emerges from those choices is what people remember. Also, this Rule Zero nonsense and the storytelling component of modern contemporary gameplay puts this crazy pressure on the DM, this undue pressure that they don't need to feel. There's this expectation now that DMs are here to craft this seamless night of storytelling and adventure, and they're the grand entertainers. And if they flub or they slow the action down, well, everything's ruined because the DM couldn't keep it together. And this is not true. You're playing a game. You're playing a game. And in other games, like board games or war games, the expectation is that if you don't know the rules, even if there's a referee, you don't know the rules, you stop, you look up the rule, you all learn the rule together, and then after several sessions, the whole group has rules mastery, and you can play seamlessly and flawlessly. It takes a while, it takes practice to get good. This contemporary idea that the DM is in charge and has rule zero and just changes things, not every DM does this. Now, I mean, that just goes for everything I say. There's always going to be counterexamples. But I played in a lot of groups. I've seen this time and time again where the DM thinks that, well, I'm here to tell story, and the rule zero, something happens that they didn't anticipate. They didn't prep for. So they make a little concession. Well, it broke the rules, let's say. Now, the expectation is that is the rule, because the DM, and it's not fun to have the DM flipping back and forth between rule interpretations. Like, okay, you have cover, and like, I forget how cover works in the system we're using. Do I get advantage? Do they have advantage? Do I have disadvantage? Or do I get a +2? Like, what's going on here? I forget. I don't want to stop the game and this flow of gameplay in order to look that up. So I'll just make up a rule that I think is close. Well, and now that's the cover rule. And you can go back and say, like, hey, I got it wrong. We have to change it to the real rule. But then it just plants a seed of doubt over what the DM's doing. If you're just honest with it, it's like, I don't know the rule, let's look it up in the rule book. It slows things down for a couple of sessions until you learn it. But once you do, you're on a much more solid foundation. Also, it inspires a lot of DMs because of this to over-prepare. They over-prepare these elaborate stories that may or may not align with player interests. And there's some manageability issues that arise as players gain power, leading to stress and burnout for the DM because they've got to prepare for every little contingency because they're so paranoid. And instead, that's coming out of Rule Zero, where the DM feels empowered to just change things as needed. And it's often not to make it more fun, it's just to make the DM's life easier. And so if we just focus on learning the rules as published, rules as written, it would solve a lot of this. Because these on-the-fly rule changes, there's this pressure to maintain this narrative flow, and it makes these Rule Zero judgments, which are often contrary to the long-term goals of the group. So speaking of these long-term consequences, I mean, often Rule Zero decisions, as I said, it creates this set of undocumented and unclear house rules, essentially. Now, some DMs, before they start a game, they publish a, document, give it to all the players. Here's all the changes I want to make. And sometimes that's fine. It's okay. That's, the DM feels empowered through this culture of Rule Zero, of I can make any change I want. It's my game, my world. The players are in it. And I would just resist that a little bit and say the game belongs to everyone playing. There's a fog of war and secrets that need to be managed by a GM or a DM. That's fine. But everything else, I mean, the DM's just a referee. Like I said, calling balls and strikes, not there to necessarily lead a group, down a path. I mean, and I'm not just talking about railroading. I'm just talking about how DMs run games. This rule zero culture. So you get these ad hoc rules and all these undocumented and unclear house rules, and then you get a lack of consistency over time. So you're several levels into your D&D campaign, you have all these inconsistent rulings, which can, frustrate everyone, and then nobody knows what to do. And then it's justified away because we're not playing a game, we're telling a story. Well, I think story-driven games have been a disaster. Now, I love the stories that come out of games. As I said, the story is what you tell about the game you played. That is the story, I would argue. And the story-driven element is a direct result of the rule zero mindset. Again, the DM's expected to create all of this. And so what happens is the stories often feel forced or mediocre and lacking in genuine engagement because it's not coming out of player agency. It's a pre-written set of events that even if you're not railroading, it's a choose your own adventure where you've only really got two or three options at each juncture. And it's all leading towards the same outcome. Now, again, a lot of people, if you're listening to this, all two of you are going to say, well, not in my game. In my game, the DM is, it's a sandbox and it's an open world and we do whatever we want. Great. That's what I'm saying you should do. And you figured it out. Great. But if the games are feeling forced, maybe reconsider rule zero and go back to a rules as written mindset. We'll see. The other problem that rule zero creates is this temptation, this dark urge for the DM to fudge dice. This is just not right. Rule zero promotes this tendency to fudge dice rolls to steer the game towards a desired outcome. And again, the justification is, I'm making the game more fun. And this often happens. You'll see this where a DM is rolling behind a screen and then the players, they wailed on this big boss monster too hard and beat them too fast. And so you want to stretch out the combat to make it more fun, or you didn't have enough plan for the evening. And then you fudge dice. And players know it. You can tell when the reaction is not genuine of like, you roll the dice like, oh, you just missed. Boy, so close. And it was really a hit. And you should have been done with the encounter. This is not fun to lie about dice rolling. That is the physics of the world. That's what keeps everything running. And once you give into that temptation, it's all over. The impact on game integrity is too high. It just undermines the fairness and just the inherent unpredictability that makes D&D fun and engaging. You want these wild events that come out of nowhere sometimes, and you just can't do that when you're lying. So this all leads to, as I've mentioned, a loss of player agency, and you get this phenomenon where D&D games turn into something like Mother May I and 20 Questions, where players are just constantly asking the DM for permission to take actions. They're unsure of what they can and they can't do, and they're looking for constant clarification from the DM because the DM is the god who runs the world, instead of just a referee helping manage the secrets of the game and run the monsters and the fog of war. A truly engaging game allows players to confidently make decisions based on a clear understanding of the rules and their character's capabilities. And if you're just asking, like, can I make a perception check to see if there's any hidden doors? Well, of course you can. Just do it. You just do it. And if the DM has to stop you for some reason, well, they can do that. But I don't know. It's not so much baked into it's just a culture that Rule Zero creates. And so there was this shift in 3rd edition, 3.5, too, from this old school. I mean, it was the end of old school. The old school I would characterize as still grounded in the wargaming culture of the 60s and 70s, where D&D was invented, this medieval skirmish combat game with fantastical elements mixed in, to building superheroes, which I love. I mean, I think you should build superheroes. I'm advocating for that with 4th edition. You should be building heroes, because the last thing anyone wants is, well, I don't know. Some people want a really low fantasy mudcore game. And I played in those, and they can be fun. It's a refreshing change after a really powerful campaign to like go and you're like, you start as these weakling nobodies and you've only got 2 torches and you'll never find a magic weapon in your life. You'll be lucky if you scrap together a few pieces of silver to rub together. It can be fun because it's like, oh, it's so realistic. We're simulating a world. And then it just gets old real fast. It's just, it wears out its welcome so fast, and it's so exhausting, and it doesn't scratch anyone's itches after a while, because it's escapist fantasy. You want to be a hero in a fantastical world most of the time. So 3.5, you could build all these broken characters, and DMs complained about it because they're too hard to kill, and I would argue you'll just give them harder monsters. But the other problem is players create these detailed characters with extensive backstories, because in the contemporary game they're not given much time, because they've been robbed of their agency. They don't have much time to shine. And a contemporary, like a modern D&D game, this is how it goes. It's the DM explains the scene, and then, eventually they say, okay, roll for combat or roll for initiative. And then everyone gets out their D20 and they roll for initiative. And then you rank the list of people to go in order. And then it's a bowling team at that point. You're just sitting back and, talking to your friends and looking at your phone and doing everything else in the world, waiting for your turn to come up, waiting for your turn to come up, waiting for your turn to come up, depending on the size of the group. And then you've got one action to do every 20 minutes or something. And you try and cram all these amazing things that you fantasized about when you built your character, and like all the character motivations that I have and all the powers, and you try and cram it into 6 pretend seconds, and it just doesn't work often. Like, well, I guess based on where I'm at in this room, all I can really do is shoot an arrow, and you're like, but I'm a noble. My background is nobility, and my motivations are I'm trying to protect the innocent, and you try and shoehorn in all these weird things that you cooked up, and you just never can. And then that needs to be fixed, because it's an illusion of choice. This abundance of options in your character creation often lead you to obsess over this character outside of gameplay, and then you never get to use it. This happens so much. This focus distracts from this core experience of reacting to the world and the story as it unfolds. And instead, you're like, nobody ever reads your character besides you and maybe the DM as well. And so many DMs hate detailed backstories anyway because they're so obsessed with cooking up their own story that, like, well, now I have to work in your extensive backstory. You know, like, I'm the one building the story here, bud. And in reality, everyone should be building the story as it happens. The story is what you tell about the game that unfolded. I'll just leave it there, maybe. I don't know. Some closing thoughts. Why I'm switching back to 4E. Does 4E fix all this stuff? No. I mean, you can fix all this stuff in any edition, but I'm trying to get away from OSR and Contemporary at the same time, and I think 4E does it. I'll explain this more in another episode, but thanks for listening, or not.